Welcome to the 9th century, or whatever time your eyes are closed in. Somewhere between the frost of a northern shore and the memory of a boy who thought blood meant bravery, if this voice finds you tonight, maybe it was meant to. Subscribe if you'd like to hear more stories they forgot to write down. I was 13 when I first asked to join the raid, not because I was strong or trained or even useful, but because I had watched them return, the older ones, with blood on their axes and salt in their beards. They'd swagger off the longboats, half drunk already, singing in broken stanzas, the kind of songs that only make sense when your knuckles are still cracked from killing. Their eyes shone like gods, I thought, not because they were holy, we had no illusions like that, but because they had seen something the rest of us hadn't. The inside of fear, maybe, the other side of mercy. They smelled like iron and sweat and the sea. That smell never leaves you, I should warn you now. Salt, leather, smoke. You can wash and scrape and burn every rag on your body, but it still lives in your nose when you lie down. I used to think it smelled like victory. I was wrong. It smells like rot. I remember the first time one of them looked at me. I mean, really looked. I was standing barefoot on the dock, pretending not to stare at his blade. He had a deep gash running down the side of his face, still fresh, still wet. I flinched when he caught me watching, but he didn't speak, just held my gaze with those sea-stained eyes and spat near my feet. "You think this makes you a man," he finally said. I didn't answer. I think I shook my head, or maybe I nodded. My memories warped around that moment like heat off a forge. "You're just hungry for the story," he added, "not the work." He wasn't wrong. I was raised on stories, not ones told by women spinning flax. Those were about foxes and clever spirits and weddings that went wrong. No, I mean the ones whispered in the smokehouse when the older men thought we were asleep. They didn't tell those stories to us. They said them at the fire for no one in particular, just half-muttered phrases. Cut him from groin to throat. Didn't scream till the third time. Priest pissed himself, but the gold was real. That was our lullaby, steel and urine and stolen coins. I learned early that the world had no soft corners, so yes, I asked to go. My mother cried the first time I mentioned it. I didn't expect that. She wasn't the weeping kind. Her hands were too cracked, her back too bent. But she cried, and then she slapped me. Hard, not out of anger, out of memory, I think. My brother had gone 3 winters earlier, never came back. She always said he died at sea, but there was no proof. Just an empty boot someone claimed was his. It was too small for him. I never believed it. Still, when the spring thaw came and the longboats were dragged from the ice, I volunteered. I carved my name into the mast with a stolen nail. I remember how proud I felt watching the curve of each letter. I didn't know then that names meant nothing to the sea. The day we left, the sky was flat gray, not cloudy, just uninterested. The kind of sky that doesn't care what you ask of it. Cold enough to make your teeth ache, but not cold enough to kill. My boots were stiff with dried sheep fat, my fingers wrapped in linen. I was trying to look like one of them, but I couldn't grow a beard. My voice cracked when I spoke. I was still a boy, even if I pretended otherwise. There's something ceremonial about shoving offshore, the scrape of hull on ice. The call of gulls that know you'll be meat soon enough, the splash of oars dipping in unison, it all felt like a rite, not sacred, just patterned, practiced. As if death had a rhythm and we were just trying to keep time. The older men didn't talk much. They grunted, farted, chewed dried fish until their jaws creaked. But at night, when the stars came out, one of them would hum just under his breath. A deep, tuneless thing that sounded like a prayer made by someone who didn't believe in prayers. I remember leaning into it like it might carry me somewhere. It never did. My arms ached by the second day. No one told me how heavy the sea was. It's not the water, really. It's the waiting, the way the sky doesn't change and the waves never end. You lose track of distance, of yourself. Your thighs cramp, your hands bleed. You stop speaking, not out of discipline, but because what's there to say? I started hallucinating by the 4th night. Nothing dramatic, just flashes. A deer on the water. A woman in a red shawl standing on the waves, arms crossed. Torvald said he saw a burning church float past. I laughed. He didn't. He never joked. That's why I liked him. He didn't pretend it was glorious. He just wanted silver. I envied that. We weren't even close to the raid yet, but I already felt older, not stronger, just less loud inside. Like the boy who carved his name was still on that dock, and I was now something else. Not quite a man. Not yet a warrior, just a passenger in a boat of ghosts. One night I tried to sing. Just a small song, the kind my grandmother used to hum while shelling peas. I didn't get 3 words in before an axe head smacked the side of my shoulder, not hard, just enough to bruise, enough to say not here. That was the rule, no songs unless you earned them. The fire I had, that hot, reckless spark that made me think I could be one of them, it didn't go out all at once. It dimmed. Each morning the cold took a little. Each evening the hunger. The silence between men grew heavier, even the sea seemed to hush around us. You'd think I would have felt regret then, but I didn't, not yet. Pride is slow to die, especially when it's young. I still told myself I'd return with something, a story, a scar, maybe a necklace of teeth. Something to show the boy who stayed behind that I had changed, that I'd crossed the sea and come back different. But no one ever tells you how often change looks like damage. It was near the 6th sunrise when the lookout spotted land. The coast was pale and empty, no towers, no men, just low green hills and the thin smoke of cooking fires. My heart raced. This was it. My first taste of what I thought was glory. I cleaned my blade for the 3rd time, checked my boots, tightened my belt so I wouldn't piss myself if I died, and I looked at Torvald, who only stared ahead like he'd done this 1,000 times. Scared? I asked. He didn't answer. He just handed me a piece of bread, hard as antler, and said, "Chew slow." That was the last kindness I remember before the first raid, and I still thought I was born for it. Gods forgive me, I did. The first thing they made us do was bleed, not in battle, that came later. No, I mean the ritual, the oath, the cutting. A blade passed from hand to hand, dull from too many initiations, warm from too many palms. We stood in a half circle that night, 20 of us, maybe less. Bare-chested despite the cold, knees half buckled from too much sour mead. And in the middle, a fire that spat more smoke than flame. They say the gods only hear you if you offer blood, not coins, not prayers, just something that stings, something wet. We were told to slice across the center of the palm, straight through the lifeline, not a prick, a cut, deep enough to feel your heartbeat pulse against the open air, deep enough to make the promise real. I remember how mine didn't bleed at first, just this angry red slit. I stared at it like it had disobeyed me. Then, suddenly, it gushed, as if my body realized what I was asking and decided to oblige. Torvald saw it and grinned. "Too proud to bleed right," he said, nudging my shoulder. I smiled back. He always said things like that, just sharp enough to sting, never cruel. That was his gift, knowing where the bruise was without needing to press hard. The others were solemn, or tried to be. Brow furrowed, chins tilted toward the sky like they were offering their cuts to the stars. I thought it looked ridiculous. We weren't saints. We were boys pretending to be monsters. The chieftain, old Rurik, stood opposite the fire. One-eyed, long beard braided with fish bones. They said he'd eaten a man once. I doubt it. He barely had teeth. He raised his arms and spoke the words. I still remember them, not because they were sacred, but because I whispered them to myself every night after, trying to make them true. I swear before blade, blood, and brother that I will not turn, I will not shame the wall, I will not run, even as my legs break beneath me. Let my name be forgotten if I leave a brother to die. We all repeated it, some with shaking voices, some loud and drunk. A few too quiet to hear. But the fire crackled and the oath took root. Then we stepped forward one by one and pressed our palms together, right hand to right hand, letting our cuts meet and mingle. Not just blood, sweat, fear, memory. Torvald was beside me. Of course he was. He always had been, since we were old enough to steal eggs and lie about it. He didn't hesitate when we clasped hands. Just gripped tight and winced slightly. His blood was darker than mine, I noticed, thicker, almost purple in the firelight. Now we're bound, he whispered. To what? I asked. He didn't answer, just squeezed harder. After the oath there was meat, always meat. A goat roasted so black on the outside it flaked apart like charcoal. Inside it was raw in places, still twitching with heat. We ate with our hands, licking fat from our wrists, the iron tang of blood still on our tongues. Someone brought out a lyre, someone else vomited near the fire. It was the usual, but I remember laughing, not just once, a lot. Loud, open-throated laughter, the kind that sounds too bright for the night it lives in. Torvald and I mocked one of the boys who'd flinched during the cut. I won't say his name, he didn't make it past the first raid. That's how it works, your name either grows louder or disappears entirely. We laughed at him, though. Said he squealed like a piglet. I thought I was being funny, I wasn't, I was just scared. And when you're scared, mocking someone else's fear makes your own shrink down for a bit, like blowing out someone else's candle so you don't have to see how small yours is. I wish I had held my tongue. I wish I had asked him what scared him so badly. I might have learned something. The night got colder after the fire burned low. Most of us fell asleep in the grass, boots still on, blades still belted. I remember lying on my back, staring at the stars and trying to feel bigger than I was. That's what the oath was supposed to do, make you feel part of something huge and ancient, but all I felt was the sting in my palm. A sticky ache, a throb that pulsed louder than the crickets. I didn't sleep much. The cut opened again the next day. We were sharpening axes when I noticed blood soaking through the cloth. I tied it tighter, didn't tell anyone. You don't complain about wounds you gave yourself. That was the first lesson the oath taught me. Pain becomes shame when you choose it. The second lesson came later. When the shield wall formed for the first time, tight bodies pressed shoulder to shoulder, round shields locked like scales on a beast. I finally understood what I had sworn to. It wasn't bravery, it wasn't glory, it was stillness. You don't swing wildly in the shield wall, you wait. You press your shoulder into the man beside you and you endure. You smell his breath, feel his sweat soaking into your sleeve. And you wait for the crash. That's what I'd promised not to flee from, not just death, not just blood, but the weight of staying, the way your legs scream to run but your feet hold the line. The way your ears ring and your knees shake and someone beside you pisses himself and you keep standing. That's what the oath bound me to, not valor, obligation. I think Torvald knew it all along. He never looked surprised when the wall closed. Just planted his feet and lowered his head like he'd already rehearsed it in a dream. Me, I panicked. I locked my jaw and clutched my shield and pretended I was ready. But I wasn't. I was still the boy on the dock, carving his name like it would protect him. That's the bitter truth of oaths. We speak them with the confidence of someone who's never paid the price. We say never run when our feet are warm and dry. We say never shame the wall when there's still distance between us and the enemy. We say let my name be forgotten like it's poetry. But when it comes time to bleed for it, not just from a palm, but from a chest, a thigh, a throat, we learn what we really meant was, I hope I won't run. Hope isn't an oath, it's a whisper, a wish. I whispered mine more than once in the months that followed. And when I think back to that fire, the blood, the cut, the smoke curling into stars, I don't feel brave. I don't feel loyal. I feel young, too young to mean what I said, too proud to admit I didn't understand it, and far too foolish to realize that blood dries but promises don't. Not out there, not when the sea is watching, not when the dead start keeping count. The first death was stupid. He slipped, that's all. Tried to piss off the side of the boat while the wind jerked west. Thought he could balance on the edge, one hand on the rigging, the other on himself. Torvald called out once, just once, and then there was a splash. We waited, not out of hope, just habit, the way you pause after a sound expecting it to repeat, but it didn't. We leaned over the edge, nothing, no arm thrashing. No cry for help, just water, endless and blank, as if he'd never stood there at all. That's the thing about the sea. She doesn't care how many oaths you've sworn. She doesn't care if your boots are new or your shield still bears your father's mark. If you fall, she takes you whole, and she does it silently. No ceremony, no farewell, we didn't stop rowing. The man beside me muttered something about the gods needing company. Someone else laughed, bitter and short. I stared at the wet wood where the boy had stood, his piss still steamed on the beam. No one remembered his name the next day. The second death came without warning. He just stopped breathing, fell asleep with his arms crossed and didn't wake up. Might have been the cold, or the rot in his lungs. Or something smaller, a clot, a spider bite, a soft part of the brain deciding it had had enough. Doesn't matter, he was quiet about it. Torvald found him, tried shaking him, slapped his cheek, hard, twice, nothing. Dead, he said, like a mouse in winter. We wrapped him in his own cloak and rolled him into the sea. There was no room for mourning or storing bodies or comfort. The longboat isn't built for grief, just war. We hadn't even seen land yet. That's when it started to sink in that this wasn't a journey or a story or some glorious passage into manhood. It was just waiting on wet planks, surrounded by cold, and dying slowly. The sea made you quiet, not reverent, just resigned. She wore you down one sense at a time. Sight first, nothing to see but fog and gray, no sun, no stars, no hint of horizon. Then smell, the stink of unwashed skin, of salted meat going sour in its wrap, of men too afraid to shit over the edge anymore. Then touch, your fingers blistered and healed and blistered again, so often you stopped noticing the blood. Then hearing the endless slosh of water, the creak of rope, the faint groan of oarlocks like old men sighing in their sleep, and last came taste, not food. That was gone by the second week. I mean the taste of your own body, the metal in your mouth from cracked lips. The salt on your tongue from biting it during sleep. The sour of your stomach, always churning, always empty. Some nights I dreamed of fresh snow, the kind that fell on the mountain behind our village, clean and soft and dumb enough to forget you. I used to wake from those dreams with my mouth open, trying to catch flakes that weren't there. One of the older men had a gangrenous toe. It turned black around day 11. He didn't show anyone, just started limping slowly at first. Torvald noticed, he always noticed, said nothing though, just started taking his shifts on the oar when he could, a quiet sort of mercy. The toe fell off 2 days later. Slid from his foot like a rotten mushroom, he flicked it overboard like it offended him. That same night, another man tried to drink seawater, only once. He didn't go mad, not like the stories say, just vacant, blank eyes, slurred words. Like he was listening to something we couldn't hear. The next morning, he rowed without orders. Even when we told him to stop, even when his hands bled, we had to tie him down with a spare length of sail. He was still tied when we saw land. I don't know if he even noticed. It's strange what you remember when everything blurs. The sound of Torvald's breath, always through his nose, always steady. The feel of my own ribs, counting them like prayer beads. The way dried meat chews more like rope than food. The itch in your beard when salt crusts in the roots. The way your shoulders throb after hours of rowing, not like pain, but like a slow confession from the body. I don't want to do this anymore. We passed a shipwreck once. The hull cracked and half submerged, no bodies, just a single boot floating, toes up. No one spoke, but I watched every face. I saw it land in their eyes, the question, would anyone notice if it were us? Would anyone remember? We were 20 when we left, 17 by the time the coast showed its teeth. No battles yet, no swords drawn, no glory. 3 men gone, and we hadn't done a single thing worth singing about. The sea was the first enemy. And she didn't even bother to fight us, she just waited. She knew we'd crumble. We were children in splinters of wood, pretending to be wolves. I started talking to the sea on day 15. Not out loud, that would have gotten me mocked or worse, just in my head, little phrases, you'll have to do better than that. I'm still here. You're not the worst thing I've met, I think she heard me. Because that night the storm came, not a mighty roar, just whined, relentless, needling wind that flayed the skin off your face. The rain came sideways. The waves slapped us like insults. One man almost went over, but Torvald grabbed him by the belt. We lashed ourselves down after that, ropes across thighs and chests to keep us from becoming ghosts too early. I don't remember sleeping, only shivering, only curling into myself like a worm in mud, waiting for the dawn to choose mercy. When the storm broke, the sky went clear, and that was worse, because we could see where we were. Nowhere, just open blue above, open gray below, and the stains on our tunics growing larger each day. I asked Torvald once if he thought we'd die before we landed. He didn't answer right away, just looked at his hands, blistered, splintered, one knuckle swollen to twice its size. "If we do," he finally said, "I hope it's fast." I didn't know what to say to that, so I didn't say anything. We sat in silence until the birds came. Tiny black dots at first, then louder, calling to each other like they knew where they were going. Birds meant land, meat, fire, and something else we hadn't let ourselves name. Survival. We didn't cheer, we just stared. None of us wanted to admit how close we'd been to breaking, how close we still were, because the sea doesn't just take men, she takes pieces. A toe, a tooth, a memory, and she keeps them, wears them like jewelry. And when she's done, when she's had her share, she lets you go. Lets you wash up on shore with salt in your lungs and regret stitched into the soles of your feet, and that's exactly what she did. The coast rose like a scar, jagged, low, bristling with pine. We'd made it, we were alive, but parts of us were still out there, floating, forgotten, and none of us could remember the name of the first man who fell. The coast didn't greet us, it simply allowed us in. No arrows from the cliffs, no horns, no men in waiting, just a long curve of sand pressed against dark trees and a silence so complete it made our boots sound ridiculous in it. We dragged the longboat into a shallow inlet and stepped onto land like we were waking from something, or entering something worse, I couldn't tell which. The trees were the first thing I noticed, black pine and damp birch, their bark flaking like old skin. And then the birds, quiet at first, as if watching. We waited for movement, for signs, for someone. Nothing. Torvald kicked a stone, then squinted uphill. "Smoke," he said, "thin and white, not the kind from burning, the kind from baking." We followed it like dogs. The ground was soft beneath our feet, full of moss and wet leaves, the kind that collect the last footprints of a village. The trail wound upward, then opened. And there it was, a clearing. Huts of wattle and thatch, fences made more to keep in goats than to keep out men. A small well, freshly covered, no banners, no church, no sounds of life, but it was alive in its own way. The door of the nearest hut was swinging slightly, not broken, just left ajar. A pot boiled over an open fire. No one stirred it. I remember the smell of bread. Real bread, baked that morning, crust golden and cracked, still warm when I touched it. Someone had sprinkled wild seeds on top. Care, that's what it smelled like. Someone had cared enough to make it beautiful. Torvald looked at me and said, "Why'd they run?" I didn't know. Maybe they heard our boat. Maybe they saw our sails from the hills. Maybe they didn't need proof, just the shape of us was enough. We weren't special. Just another storm on two legs. The goats were still tied. 4 of them bleeding quietly, their legs wound with rope and their eyes wide but blank. We didn't free them, we were told not to waste meat. One of the men found a larder behind the largest hut, salted fish, sacks of barley, apples already browning. Another found a cradle tipped over in the corner, empty, the blanket still warm. That was the first time my stomach turned. I told myself it was hunger. We took what we could carry. Blankets, knives. A necklace that looked like amber but was probably just stained bone. One man tried to lift a loom and nearly dropped it. Another pissed in the fire and laughed too loud. Torvald didn't take much, just a fur cloak and a few dried mushrooms. He kept staring at the trees. "They're watching," he said. "Who?" I asked. He didn't answer. The sun dipped lower. The clearing shifted. The village looked embarrassed, like a place that had been caught naked. We should have left then. But Rurik said we had to finish it. No sense in leaving anything behind. No sense in letting a home still stand where we'd passed through. What if they returned? What if they rebuilt? What if they forgot to be afraid? So we burned it. It started with the smallest hut. A torch pressed to dry grass, the flame caught like memory. Then it grew, jumped from roof to roof like it was dancing. I remember someone shouting. A howl, maybe, but it came from us, one of our own, too drunk or too thrilled to stay quiet. A wild sound, high and stupid. I stood back and watched the fire eat. The bread turned black first, then the loom collapsed in sparks. Then the goats caught, they screamed, they always scream. One man puked, another cheered. I just stood there. Smoke stung my eyes. I told myself it was only that, not sorrow, not doubt, just smoke. But then I saw them. The shoes, tiny, leather, hand-stitched, tucked beneath a bench that had escaped the first flame, still paired, still perfect. I stared at them for what felt like an hour. Torvald pulled me back when the roof collapsed. We slept in the ashes that night. Not for lack of places, the forest was wide, the hills empty, but because Rurik said sleeping where the fire had passed would keep the spirits off us. He said they feared their own homes once burned. I don't know if that was true. I just remember the ground being warm and the smell of scorched barley in my nose as I drifted off. No songs were sung. No tales were told. We didn't speak of victory. What would we have said? That we'd bested bread and goats, that we'd slaughtered blankets and a cradle, that we'd silenced a village that was already gone. The next morning we found a girl's ribbon in the weeds, red, frayed at the ends. It had caught on a thorn bush. Torvald tucked it into his belt, didn't say why, never spoke of it again. The ashes followed us, stuck in our clothes, our hair, our teeth. Every time I swallowed, I tasted them, not the people, the absence of them. That's what tasted so bitter. The knowledge that we weren't conquering, we were interrupting. The village hadn't fallen, it had evaporated. We never saw who lived there, never heard their names. But I remember the layout of their lives better than my own. The well with the rope still wet, the bowl carved with birds, the way the earth was softer around the cradle as if walked on often by bare feet. And the shoes, gods, the shoes, I don't remember what I did with them. Maybe I left them there. Maybe I kicked them into the fire, but they've never left me. Even now, in the far corner of sleep, I sometimes feel them near my feet, like I've stepped into someone else's childhood and can't get out. Rurik said it was a clean raid, no blood, no bodies, no curses. He said we were lucky. I don't know if luck is what I'd call it. It was something else. Something heavier than fear, lighter than guilt. Like carrying smoke in your lungs, you can't see it anymore, but it's still there, still burning. We marched inland the next day. The trees thinned. The air cooled, and no one spoke of the village. But that's the strange thing about silence. It doesn't mean you've forgotten. It just means you're not ready to say what you remember. The ale was the first thing to disappear. We didn't notice it at first, not really. We still had enough for a sip at night, enough to rinse the ash off our tongues. But after the second raid, when we sat by a dying fire with cracked lips and twitching hands, someone turned the last jug upside down and nothing came out. No one said a word. We just stared at it. Like maybe if we glared hard enough, the ale would return. Like our thirst might shame it back into the clay, it didn't, and something shifted in us. We weren't drunk, not really, most of the time, but ale softened the world. It blurred the edges, made the smoke dance prettier, made the stories sound braver, and without it, the silence sharpened. You started hearing things, the way a man chewed, the way he breathed through his nose when he slept, the way he muttered to himself before a fight. It got louder than the forest. We raided again 3 days later. Another village, larger than the first, more things to steal, but no ale, just cider, half-fermented and thick as spit. We drank it anyway. It burned our stomachs and loosened our bowels. 2 men fought over a dried plum. One bled from the eye, the other from the groin. Neither of them walked right afterward. That night, someone vanished. His name was Håkon. He wasn't liked, but he wasn't hated either. Just there. He'd carried a red cloth tied around his arm so he could always find it in the dark. We found the cloth the next morning, tied around a tree branch, fluttering like a warning. His body never turned up. Rurik said wolves, but we hadn't seen tracks. Torvald didn't speak, just stared at the cloth like it had betrayed him. After Haken, men stopped sleeping alone. We made excuses for it: colder nights, softer moss, but the truth sat between us like a broken blade. Something had cracked and we couldn't name it. A week passed, food thinned. We were still raiding, but we weren't finding much. Burnt out houses, fled farms, smoke in the distance that always cleared by the time we arrived. We blamed each other. Quietly at first, a glance, a missing strip of dried meat. A cloak that smelled like someone else's sweat. Then came the accusations. You took my turn with the stew. Those boots aren't yours. I saw you pocket that coin. Rurik tried to keep order, barked threats, broke a man's nose with the flat of his axe, but he was tired, we all were, and hunger makes you bold in the worst ways. The worst night came just after we found the pickled sausage. One, just one, in a jar beneath a collapsed pantry, thick-skinned and gray but whole. Torvald found it, held it up like treasure, but he didn't eat it, not right away. He wanted to share it, cut it into 6 pieces, tiny things, barely a bite, but he said, "Fair is fair." Most nodded. One did not, Orm, big man. Bad teeth, not clever. He said 6 pieces weren't enough, said Torvald was hoarding, said the gods didn't reward cowards. Then he grabbed the jar. Torvald didn't fight back, not really, just held tighter than Orm expected. The jar cracked, ale slick hands, mud underfoot. And then they were in the river. It wasn't deep, not really. But fast, they thrashed, shouted. The jar floated downstream, forgotten. By the time we pulled them out, Orm was still, face down, water in his throat, his nose, his ears. Torvald gasped beside him, shaking, bleeding from the forehead. We didn't speak, we didn't accuse. We just looked at the sausage, still bobbing in the shallows, and turned away. After that, the silence became permanent. No stories, no songs, just the work, looting, marching, setting fire, and the waiting, always the waiting, for food, for sleep, for someone else to vanish. A few nights later, I caught someone rifling through my pack, didn't see who, just the shape, hunched and fast. They took my flint. Left the salted fish. I don't know what that meant, but it felt like a warning. So I started keeping a blade under my tongue at night. Small thing, not for killing, just persuading. The dreams got worse, not nightmares exactly, just feverish. I'd wake sweating, gasping, heart racing like I'd been chased. I dreamed of home, of the old hearth. My mother turning fish on a spit. She never spoke, just looked at me like she didn't recognize the man I'd become. Maybe she wouldn't have. I hadn't bathed in weeks. My skin flaked, my nails blackened. I scratched myself raw in the night. My teeth ached from grinding them. I smelled like a corpse that hadn't made up its mind yet. And still, I didn't want to go back, because going back meant explaining it, all of it. The vanished men, the broken jars, the bruises that weren't from battle. It meant saying out loud that we weren't warriors anymore. We were animals with weapons. One man strangled another in his sleep, said he was whispering too much, that he was plotting. I didn't believe him. But I helped bury the body anyway, because the earth was soft, and the silence was easier than the argument. Torvald changed, not all at once, but noticeably. He used to hum just low, tuneless little things. Stopped that, stopped speaking altogether except when absolutely needed. He still shared, still handed me food when he found it. But he stopped looking me in the eye. I asked him once if he remembered the oath. The one we bled for, I said. He nodded. Still believe in it, I asked. He didn't answer. Just handed me the last strip of bark bread and walked away. I should have said more. But the hunger in my stomach was louder than the ache in my heart. I ate it. And I hated myself for how good it tasted. It was too clean to be real. That was my first thought when I pulled it from his hands. The knight, or whatever he was, lay half curled in a ditch beside the chapel ruins, flies already gathering in the crook of his neck. His armor bent in the middle like a tin cup stomped by a boot, but the sword, untouched, polished, perfect. A glint of sun catching on the crossguard like it had never seen a raider's hand. No rust, no nicks, not even dirt along the fuller. Someone had loved this blade, cared for it, whispered to it maybe, slept beside it. And now it was mine. I didn't tell the others. There was no need. Most of them were too busy looting the priest's cellar, which turned out to be just dry cheese and broken candles. No ale, no silver. The chapel had been built poor and lived poor. But the night he'd been traveling through, maybe, or guarding something. His body told no tales, his face was crushed too flat to show fear. I pried the sword from his hand, it didn't want to leave, not in some magical, cursed way, just stubborn, like it belonged there, as if it remembered who it answered to. My fingers slipped twice. I felt foolish, kneeling over a corpse, wrestling a piece of steel like it had opinions. When it came loose, I staggered back, half expecting the knight to rise. He didn't, of course he didn't, but I checked twice just to be sure. The grip was leather. Wrapped tight, stitched in a pattern I'd never seen before, neat little crosses that pinched the palm when held tight. The pommel was a wolf's head, not snarling, just watching. I should have known better. We weren't supposed to take weapons from men like that. Torvald had told me once, back when we were boys, half believing our grandmother's stories, that steel remembers its owner. That if a sword has taken a life in one name, it won't serve another unless it's been properly laid to rest. I never asked what that meant. I wish I had. Because from the moment I slung it over my back, things started to feel tilted. Not wrong exactly, just off, like walking on a boat that was moving ever so slightly. The first time I drew it was the next morning. A monk had run from the tree line, robes flapping like torn sails, face wild. He wasn't armed. Just screaming something we couldn't understand, praying maybe, or cursing. Hard to tell, we'd seen enough of both to stop caring. Someone shouted, another raised his axe, but I was faster. I stepped forward, gripped the sword, and drew it in one clean motion. It moved like wind, no resistance. No drag, the blade hummed, I swear it hummed as it left the scabbard, and then it cut. Not wildly, not with rage, just one stroke, smooth, clean from shoulder to hip. The monk folded. That's the word that comes to mind, folded, like cloth, like a prayer rug being packed away, no scream, no sound, just blood and the shape of a man becoming something else. I stood over him, sword still warm in my hand, and I felt it. Not pride, not guilt, something in between. The blade vibrated, not literally, not like a bell, but inside me. Like my bones knew this kill didn't belong to me, like something sacred had been broken, and not by the monk. Torvald saw me, he didn't speak. He just looked down at the body, then at the sword, and then he looked away. That night I couldn't sleep. The others snored, farted, mumbled, one chewed on bark in his dreams. I lay there, eyes open, blade beside me. Wrapped in cloth, hidden but not gone. Every breeze felt like breath on my neck. Every creak in the trees sounded like footsteps. I imagined the monk's voice, soft, wet, echoing from inside the blade. He hadn't moved, that's what bothered me most. He hadn't flinched, hadn't raised a hand, just ran toward us like he wanted to die. Or thought he couldn't, and I'd made him wrong. I thought about giving the sword up, throwing it in the river, letting the current carry it somewhere I couldn't follow, but I didn't. Because it was the best blade I'd ever held, balanced, sharp, beautiful. And because I didn't want to admit I was afraid of it, I started drawing it more often, during watch, during idle hours. Practicing cuts into the air, into branches, into logs already rotting. It always felt too smooth, too graceful, like it wanted to guide my hand rather than follow it. One morning I nicked myself, just a scratch across the forearm, barely more than a paper cut, but it bled like I'd opened a vein. The others joked, said the blade was hungry. I laughed too loud. Too long. That night I dreamt of the monk again, only this time he smiled, not with kindness, not with forgiveness, just smiled, like he knew something I didn't. When I woke, the sword was lying across my chest. I don't remember placing it there, and that terrified me. Torvald finally spoke. You should bury it, he said, eyes on the fire. It's mine, I replied. He nodded. That's what the last man said. What last man? But he didn't answer. He just stood and walked into the trees. When he returned, he carried nothing, and said nothing more. I tried once, just once, to leave the sword behind. laid it under a tree, half buried it in leaves, then walked an hour north. Every step felt heavier, like my body was trying to turn around. Like something behind me was pulling softly at my ribs. When I finally stopped, I was sweating. Cold, dizzy, I went back. It was still there, untouched, waiting. I strapped it back on and whispered sorry, not to the night, not to the monk, to the blade. I wish that were the end of it, but it wasn't. Because after that, something inside me began to shift. I started hearing things. Not voices exactly, just thoughts I didn't recognize, urges that weren't mine. I'd wake in the night gripping the hilt. I'd stare too long at the others, not with hate, not with envy, with calculation. I don't know how else to explain it. Like I was waiting for something to give me permission. The blade never spoke, but it didn't have to, it remembered, and that was enough. The thing no one tells you about a shield wall is that it isn't built on strength, it's built on trust. On the hope that the man beside you will hold, that his shoulder won't give out, that his grip won't slip, that he won't run when the sound of hoofbeats gets too close. The wall isn't a wall at all, it's men. Tired, hungry, frightened men trying to remember what the oath meant when it was first spoken. We formed it in the dark just before dawn. The sky was bleeding blue at the edges, clouds flat and low like the lid of a pot. We'd been warned they were coming, Saxons or Normans or someone angrier than us. I forget the banner, some red animal, didn't matter. What mattered was that they knew we were here. And that we had nowhere to run. Rurik barked the order. We gathered. I took my place near the center, not because I was brave, but because the sides always fell first. Everyone knew that. Center meant survival, or at least it used to. Torvald stood to my left. He didn't look afraid, he never did, but he adjusted his grip on the axe twice in the same minute. That was his tell. Still got that pretty sword, he asked. I nodded. Bet it'll make a fine grave marker. That was the last thing he said to me. I wish I'd said something back, anything. The first volley came before the sun cleared the trees. Arrows, fast, silent. One struck a man near the end, straight through the eye. He dropped without a sound. We tightened the line. The second volley was louder, whistling shafts and the thunk of wood, the gasp of men realizing they weren't invincible. Then came the charge. You don't hear it at first, you feel it. The ground trembling like a drum beneath your boots, then the hooves, then the voices, and then impact. The front line met them like a cough meets a fist. Shields slammed, swords scraped, bodies collided in wet thuds. It was chaos but practiced, a kind of choreographed madness. I held the line. So did Torvald. We moved like gears, step, block, swing, step, block, swing. Then someone screamed, a break on the left, just a flicker, but I saw it. 2 men went down, not from wounds, but from retreat. They stepped back just a pace, that's all it takes. The line bends, then it thinks about folding, and the thinking is worse than the doing. Because suddenly every man wonders, if I run now, maybe I live. I looked left again. Torvald wasn't there, just a gap, and something on the ground that might have been a body. It wasn't clean, there was no moment, no fall, no last breath. He was simply gone, swallowed by the clash. I wanted to step toward him, to check, to drag him out, but I couldn't. Because the man to my right was leaning on me too hard. Because someone behind me was shouting, hold, 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 like that would keep our bones from snapping. Because I wasn't brave, so I stayed, and the line broke, not like glass, not suddenly, like rot. A slow sagging, one man at a time deciding to survive instead of stand, first on the left, then the right. Then the man behind me turned and ran, and the hole he left made me stumble. I heard Rurik yelling, couldn't see him. Someone shoved me. A shield hit my jaw. The sword flew from my hand. I fell. The ground was mud and metal and too many legs. I crawled, got kicked, bit someone's ankle. Found the blade again, half buried. I stood, and that's when I saw it, not the enemy, us, running, collapsing, throwing shields, throwing names. One man shouted brotherhood before he tripped and was trampled. The Saxons didn't cheer. They didn't have to, they just kept swinging. I killed one, I think. He was young, maybe younger than me. His helmet was too big. I caught him beneath the chin. He gurgled. Another tried to spear me but slipped. I ran him through. My blade stuck. I left it there. Grabbed another from the ground. Kept moving, not fighting. Not exactly, just moving, trying not to be the next one folded into mud. The forest was close. A line of trees where the light broke the smoke. Some made it. Others didn't. I ran. I'd love to tell you I stayed, that I shouted men back into the line, that I turned to hold the gap where Torvald had fallen. But I didn't. I ran, because everyone else did. Because I was scared, because the shield wall isn't built on courage, it's built on proximity. And once the man beside you vanishes, you're just a man alone, holding a piece of wood in front of your heart, hoping it's enough. I don't know how far I ran. The forest swallowed sound. My breath hurt. My ears rang. My fingers were numb and slick with something that wasn't mine. When I finally collapsed, the sword fell beside me. The one with the wolf on the pommel, still clean, still watching. I lay there until dusk, not praying, not mourning, just remembering. The way Torvald had looked at me that morning, the way he'd adjusted his grip twice, the way his voice had sounded when he said grave marker, like he knew. Like he'd already accepted it. He died early, too early, and no one noticed, not really, not with the arrows, the shouting, the fear. No one stopped to mark the moment, not even me. And that's what haunts me most. Not that he died, that I kept standing, that I stayed in formation and let the wall rot beside me, that I was part of the rot. After the battle, we gathered what was left of us. Half, maybe less, no leader, no songs, just wounded men staring at each other like strangers. We didn't speak of Torvald, we didn't speak at all. And the wall, that sacred thing we swore to hold, was now a memory we couldn't bear to look at. It had broken, but we had broken first. We didn't knock, we just limped through the broken gate and let the wind announce us. The abbey sat hunched on a hill, pale stone, long shadows, wooden cross crooked on the roof like a head too tired to lift. The bells were silent, the gardens bare. One door creaked open before we touched it, and a monk stepped out with his hands raised like he already knew we wouldn't listen. He was right. We didn't come to pillage, not this time. We came because we had nowhere else to go. There were 12 of us, maybe. 13 if you counted the boy with the torn belly who wouldn't last the night. None of us whole. None of us clean. We looked more like plague than warriors, burned, bandaged, soaked in the blood of other men and some of our own. Faces so hollow they no longer looked like ours. I dragged my leg behind me. The wound had gone black around the edges, didn't hurt much anymore, which worried me. Pain meant life, numbness meant rot. The monk didn't run, he didn't welcome us either, just stepped aside and let us in. The hall smelled of old wax and boiled roots. Thin windows leaked pale light onto stone floors. Someone had swept recently. The dust lay in quiet piles, undisturbed, until we stepped through and left new marks. One man collapsed before reaching a bench. Another started weeping. No one mocked him. I found a corner and leaned into it, slid down until the cold met my back. My leg pulsed. Or maybe I did. Hard to tell where one began and the other ended. A younger monk knelt beside me, didn't speak, just peeled back the cloth on my thigh and winced. I didn't blame him. It looked like something had chewed me. He poured something bitter on it. I howled. He didn't flinch, just started sewing, lips moving in silent prayer. I stared at the ceiling and counted each pull of the thread like it was a drumbeat in a funeral march I hadn't been invited to. I remember thinking the sky would fall through the roof. I hallucinated fire, not heat, not light, just the sense of burning as if the air had caught and my lungs were made of dry bark. I coughed and tasted blood. Someone handed me water. Or wine or vinegar, it all tasted the same. Time split. Somewhere in that stone-walled silence, the day ended and began again. I saw faces I didn't recognize. A man with no nose, a boy with eyes too large for his head, a shadow that kept walking the hall without feet. I don't think they were all real. A dog wandered in the next evening, skinny. Mud-caked, ribs like knives. It sniffed the air, stepped once into the hall and stopped, ears perked, tail low, then it turned and ran, didn't bark, didn't growl, just ran. The monks said nothing, they kept moving like we weren't there. One stirred broth no one wanted. Another sang in Latin beneath his breath, eyes shut like if he opened them we'd vanish. Maybe we already had. At night we slept on cloaks and benches, some on the floor. I shared a space with the man who used to joke about his wife's stew. He didn't speak anymore, just held his side and whispered something over and over. I listened once. He was confessing, not loudly, not like in the old stories, no tears, no begging, just words, quiet, raw. I took the bread, he said. From a boy, 7 maybe, he held it too long like he thought I wouldn't snatch it. I took it. Another man mumbled about drowning someone. He coughed too loud, he said. They were listening, I did what I had to. And another, she wasn't supposed to be there. They said the house was empty. Each night brought more, not all of them spoke. Some just shook, or clutched at wounds that weren't visible. But those of us who did talk didn't look at each other. We spoke like the air itself was listening. Like it might forgive us. The monks never wrote our names, never asked for them. They treated our wounds, brought us water. Lit candles near the altar that flickered the same way the boy with the torn belly did before he finally stopped breathing. We wrapped him in his own cloak and left him beneath the oak outside. The roots were thick there. They'd know what to do. I caught my reflection once. In a brass plate someone had left on a windowsill. I didn't recognize it. My cheeks were sunken. Eyes bloodshot, hair matted, lips cracked and too pale. I looked like the ghost of a man who had once played at being a raider. The sword lay beside me, still clean, still untouched by the monk's fire or my fever dreams. I didn't draw it any more, didn't dare. I was afraid if I touched it again, I'd remember something I'd buried. Or worse, that it would remember me. The others started calling the abbey the waiting room. Said it felt like the space between living and not, too quiet, too clean. One joked it was the gods' way of mocking us, letting us fall apart somewhere holy. I didn't laugh, because it felt true. This place wasn't salvation, it was purgatory. Cold and slow and full of men who didn't know if they'd already died. I asked the monk, the younger one, why they let us stay. He looked at me with tired eyes and said, "Even devils bleed." And that was the end of it. No sermons, no threats, just a quiet truth that sat heavier than any wound. I bled on their floor, stared at their cross. Listened to my brothers whisper their sins like bedtime stories meant to ward off something darker than sleep. And I realized something I hadn't before. We were no longer men. We were not warriors. We were not raiders. We were ghosts. Shadows curled in borrowed stone, waiting for the sky to remember us and sweep us back into dust. And somehow that felt right. He told me in a whisper, that's what made it worse. Not a defiant shout, not a drunken rant, just a whisper like he was saying it to himself and I just happened to be there. I think I'm going home. We were sitting under the eaves of the abbey, watching mist crawl up from the grass. Morning had barely lifted. The air still carried the cold of night. My leg throbbed in its usual rhythm. I remember holding a piece of boiled root between my teeth, soft enough to chew, bitter enough to regret. "What?" I asked, not because I hadn't heard him, but because I had. He looked straight ahead, not at me. I said, "I think I'm going home. My wife's sick, or she was when I left. I never should have come." His name was Eirik, from the coast. Had a limp before the raid, from a boyhood fall off a horse, and now walked with a tilt that made one side of his cloak always muddy. He wasn't fierce, wasn't loud, wasn't anything, really. Just there, like a stone you trip over. "You're not going anywhere," I said, quiet. Firm, like I was reminding him of a rule we both agreed to. He nodded once, then again. "I know, I think I'm going." He stood slowly, brushed ash from his knees, and stepped toward the chapel door. Something in me snapped. Maybe it was the way he moved, not sneaking, not rushing, just walking. Like it was his right. Like the rest of us weren't still rotting where we sat. Maybe it was what he said, my wife, as if the rest of us didn't leave someone behind too. Maybe I needed to stop someone from going because I couldn't bear the shame of not leaving myself. I followed him, didn't plan it, didn't think, I just followed. He was near the gate when I caught him. No one else was around, just us. I grabbed his shoulder. He turned, startled, not afraid, not ready. "Don't," I said. "I'm not stealing anything," he replied. "That's not what I meant." He shrugged. "Then what do you mean?" I didn't have an answer, so I hit him. First in the jaw, not hard enough to drop him, just enough to stop the words. He stumbled, looked at me, confused. "You don't get to walk away," I said. "I'm not walking away from you," he answered. "I'm walking home." And that made something in me twist, because it sounded clean. And I hadn't felt clean in months. I tackled him. We went down hard into the mud, into the gravel, into the broken weeds and the cracked prayers buried under the soil. He hit me back, weakly, not a fighter. He wasn't trying to win, he was trying to end it. And I didn't stop. I pressed my arm against his throat, pinned his shoulder with my knee. My hands found his neck. He kicked, scratched, then went still. His eyes, I still see them. Not afraid, not angry, just tired, like someone who'd been trying not to cry all night and finally gave up. His lips moved once, might have been her name, might have been mine, then nothing. Silence. My hands stayed there too long, felt the last throb of life before it went flat. I let go, stumbled back, stared at him like he was going to sit up and scold me. He didn't. Of course he didn't. I looked around, no one. Just the chapel and the trees and the morning mist that didn't care what I'd done. I buried him myself, behind the abbey wall, near the slope where the grass grew longer, untouched. No cross, no stone, just a small pile of dirt. I sat with him for a while, told him I was sorry, not out loud, just in my head. He wouldn't have cared anyway. I told myself he was going to die out there, that he wouldn't have made it home, that it was a mercy, but I was lying. He might have made it. He might have made it because he wanted something. And I killed him because I didn't. That night I didn't speak, didn't eat, just sat by the fire and let the smoke sting my eyes. The others didn't ask where Eirik went. They never did. Men vanished all the time. No one wanted to be the one to say their name. I cleaned my hands in the basin where the monks washed their vegetables, scrubbed them raw, skin peeling, blood rising, but I still felt him, the curve of his spine, the weight of his breath against my arm, the way his body stopped resisting. It doesn't leave you killing like that. It's not the same as a raid or a battle or some faceless man charging you with steel in his eyes. It's worse because you see yourself in him. You see the part that wants out, the part that remembers home, the part that doesn't want to wear blood anymore. And when you kill that part in someone else, you kill it in yourself too. I haven't felt clean since. I still wake with his name in my throat, and I didn't even know his wife's. I never saw her face, but she saw mine, I'm sure. Somewhere in the dark, in the way grief reaches out through stone and skin, I know she felt it. And maybe one day someone will tell her where he lies, or maybe not. Maybe no one will. Maybe no one should, because I didn't bury a warrior. I buried a man who tried to remember who he was, and I was the one who made him forget. It was the third morning after I buried Eirik. The sun didn't come up so much as peer through the cracks, faint and disinterested. The kind of light that makes everything look washed out, not gold, not gray, just tired. I woke to the sound of feet on stone, boots, urgent, not running, but close. Then the breathless voice of the scout, a boy really, younger than I'd ever admit we were when this all started. "They're coming," he said, not loud, not dramatic, just stated like someone telling you there's rain in the distance or soup on the fire. "They've seen our tracks, there's banners, maybe 40 men." Someone cursed. Someone else started strapping on what was left of their armor, mostly scraps now, dented plate, belts that no longer buckled, rusted bits of faith. I rolled over, not away from them, just onto my back into the damp straw and stared at the ceiling. Above me, the beams groaned softly. Old wood, bent from the years, just like us. I heard the horns then, not ours, theirs, far off, faint but real. The sound curled into the walls like a breath you didn't ask to take. Rurik barked orders, or what passed for Rurik now, a man with a crushed knee and a voice hoarse from silence. He told them to move, told them to take the woods, told them it wasn't over, but it was. I didn't get up. No one stopped me. No one asked why. There were no speeches, no glares. Just men stepping around me like I was another piece of the abbey, something rotting, something still. I could have stood. Could have drawn that cursed sword again. Could have dragged my leg behind me one more time, limped into the trees, into the noise, into the lie. But I didn't, because I couldn't, because something in me had finally folded, not like the shield wall that had bent under pressure, under fear. This was different. This was release. I lay in that straw and listened to boots fading into the woods, listened to the horn blow again, listened to the shouts as they took position, clumsy, fractured. Then listened to the silence that followed. It wasn't victory. It wasn't death, just a pause, like the world had taken a deep breath and didn't know what to do next. A monk walked past me. He looked down, saw my eyes open, nodded once, didn't stop, didn't question. He understood. That was the worst part, how easy it was to understand. I stared at the rafters and tried to remember how this all began. The boy I was, sharp-eyed, hungry, so sure that war was a kind of baptism. That blood made you clean. That fire turned you into something holy. I couldn't even picture his face anymore. Just the curve of his name scratched into the mast of a boat that had long since drifted into memory. I thought about Torvald, about Eirik, about the others. And I thought about the ones I'd forgotten, men who had stood beside me, shouldered the same weight, sworn the same oath, and vanished without even a grave. Their names had leaked out of me, one by one. The price of survival. That's the thing no one teaches you. Forgetting isn't failure, it's how you stay alive. If you remember too much, the weight crushes you, so I let them go. Let them all drift out of my mind like mist through broken windows, and I just lay there. The straw was damp beneath me. Smelled of old rot and cold feet. My breath came in shallow pulses. My hands itched but didn't move. The sword was beside me, wrapped in cloth. I didn't reach for it. I didn't want it, not anymore. It was too heavy, even when untouched, too full. I closed my eyes, tried to sleep, didn't. Just floated in that space between thought and absence, where nothing hurts because nothing is asked of you. The horns sounded again, closer. I flinched, not in fear, but in memory. It sounded like the first raid. Like the first time I'd held a blade and believed it meant something, but now I knew better. Steel doesn't carry meaning, only weight, only blood, only the sound it makes when it hits something softer than itself. I lay there as the abbey held its breath. The monks moved quietly. A bell rang, soft, slow, not an alarm, just a call to pray. Someone moaned outside. Then nothing. No charge, no battle cry, just wind. I don't know if the army found them, if they scattered, if they bled, if they ran. No one came back to tell me. No one came at all, and I didn't go looking. That was the moment I stopped pretending. Stopped trying to be what I was never meant to be. Stopped carrying the weight of a war I didn't understand. You can call it cowardice. You can call it wisdom. I don't call it anything. It just was like hunger, like sleep, like death. I stayed in the straw until the light changed, and when I finally sat up, the world hadn't ended. It had simply moved on, without me. I don't know how long I was asleep, or if I was truly sleeping at all. It might have been the kind of rest that lives just below waking, when your eyes are shut but your ears still twitch, when your limbs are limp but your mind rolls slow through half-memories and blurred dreams. I remember hearing birds, not many, just 2 or 3, small ones, with the kind of call that doesn't try to impress anyone, just a simple song like breathing with feathers. And I remember the crunch of feet on gravel. That brought me up, not fast. Just enough to part my eyelids and see light shift on stone, There she was, a girl. 12, maybe, hard to say. Thin in that way children get when the world forgets to feed them. Her dress was too big, the sleeves rolled up in knots, mud crusted high along the hem. Barefoot, freckles across the bridge of her nose, and a knife in her hand, a real knife, not a kitchen blade. A short, curved thing, too heavy for her wrist, too sharp for her age. She held it in both hands, pointed at my chest. I didn't move. She didn't speak right away. Just watched me, breath shallow, arms shaking. Then she asked, "Was it you?" Her voice was dry, like she hadn't spoken to anyone in days, maybe weeks. "Was it you who took him?" I swallowed. "What?" I asked, barely more than a whisper. "My brother. He was 12. Brown hair. He had a scar here." She tapped her collarbone with the blade tip. "You came to our village. You burned the barn. You took him." I didn't know what to say. I didn't know which village she meant, or which boy, or how many barns we'd burned by then. It could have been me. It could have been someone beside me. It could have been no one at all, just the smoke and the fear and the confusion that turns running into vanishing. I looked into her eyes, and I saw the kind of knowing that doesn't come from books or stories or bedtime whispers. I saw memory. Something carved in with loss and left to scab over. "I don't know," I said. She blinked. I could have said no, firmly, could have told her I'd never take a child, that I wasn't that kind of man, but I didn't, because I didn't know anymore what I had done, what I had seen, what I had let happen. She took a step closer. I didn't flinch. "If it was you," she said, "I'll kill you." Her voice cracked a little at the end, not from weakness, from weight. I nodded. "All right." That's all I said, no plea, no apology, just all right. She looked at me for a long time after that. The knife still pointed, still trembling. Her lip twitched, her throat pulsed, then her arms dropped, slowly, like they were no longer hers to command. She turned without a word and walked away. I didn't stop her, didn't follow, didn't ask her name. She vanished through the side door of the abbey like smoke from a tired fire. I sat up finally, felt the ache in my ribs, the old sting in my leg. I looked at the spot where she'd stood. There was a boot print in the dust, small, barely pressed, already fading. And something in me, something I thought had dried up completely, stirred. Not redemption, I wasn't that lucky, not forgiveness, I hadn't earned that, just recognition. A thread between us. Two people cracked open by the same war, her looking for someone, me trying to forget everyone. I kept thinking about her knife. How it had shaken in her hands but never dropped, how close it came, and how easy it would have been to let it in. To let her carve some kind of justice into my chest and walk away a little lighter, but she hadn't. She left me there, untouched, not because I deserved it, but because she chose not to be like us. And that mattered, more than any battle, more than any oath, more than any scar. That was the first time in a long while that I felt seen, not as a warrior, not as a ghost, not as the ruin I'd become, but as a man. Flawed. Bruised, breakable. And I couldn't stop thinking, what if I had walked into her village? What if I'd been the one to knock down her door? What if I had watched her brother run and told myself it was just another boy in the smoke? Would I have remembered his face? Would I have even noticed? I don't know, but I remember hers, every freckle, every quiver, every beat of silence between us. And when I sleep now, when I can sleep, it's her voice I hear, not shouting, just asking, "Was it you?" And even now, I don't know what the answer is. I regret it. Every swing of the axe, every shout in the dark, every cheer I gave while smoke curled into the sky behind a burning roof and someone begged for help in a language I didn't try to understand. I regret the boy with the bread who didn't run fast enough. The woman who hid beneath the floorboards and thought breathing quietly would save her. The monk who never raised his arms. The man I strangled. The friend I watched disappear without even calling his name. I regret them all, but I wouldn't warn you. If I were that boy again, barefoot on the frost, face tilted toward the sailcloth, heart swollen with wanting, I would still go. Because no one told me not to, because the cold was biting and the stories were warm, because the village was small and the longboats were wide, and when the older men came back with red on their hands and silver in their belts, no one asked where it came from. They just sang louder. And because I wanted something, not just blood, not just gold, something, a feeling, a name, a reason to matter, I chased it through fire and bone and silence, and I found pieces of it, shattered, heavy, and now I carry them. That's the price, not death, memory, to remember it all and live. To remember it wrong and wonder, to remember it too clearly and drown. You don't understand what it means to carry blood until you can't put down the memory of someone's eyes. How many eyes have I seen? How many did I close? How many did I choose not to look into? The blade rusts, the body weakens, but the eyes, they stay, floating behind sleep, flickering in the corner of a quiet room, watching, not accusing, just waiting. I thought battle would make me a man. It didn't. It made me tired. It made me a liar to myself, to the boy who stood on the dock, to every mother who asked what happened to her son and got silence in return. It made me small, not broken, just shrunk, worn thin by hunger and rot and the ache of always pretending. Even now, my hands twitch when I hear certain sounds, the snap of dry wood, the ring of iron on stone. My body remembers things I want it to forget, like the weight of someone else's bag on my back. Like the warmth of blood on a cold day. Like the grin of a man who would be dead an hour later. I kept pieces of them, not trophies, just moments, a ribbon, a coin, a song I still hum, even though I don't know what the words meant. They linger long after the noise ends. Long after the fire turns to ash. Long after you sit down and think, what was it for? Not glory. That faded the moment we realized we'd have to carry home what we'd done. Not revenge, we forgot who wronged us. The names blurred. The reasons died before the people did. Not wealth, you can't eat gold. You can't warm yourself with silver when winter cracks your bones. So what then? I don't know, and that's the hardest part. To look back at everything, the loss, the hunger, the horror, and say, I still would have gone. Because the boy I was had no other way to learn. You think you can warn someone out of pain. But you can't. Pain doesn't listen. Pride doesn't pause. You can lay your story out like a map, bloodstains and all, and the next boy will still say, I can survive it. Maybe he will. But he'll come back quieter. And if he doesn't, if he ends in the mud, in the fire, in the space behind an abbey wall, then at least he'll understand something that no story can teach. That the sword you carry is never just a weapon. It's a mirror. It shows you what you are when the noise stops, when the dust settles. When the screaming becomes silence and the silence becomes regret. I don't raise my voice anymore. There's no need. The only ones who still listen are the ghosts, and they already know how the story ends. I once dreamed of dying in battle. Now I dream of a kitchen, a woman humming, the smell of onions in a pan, a dog asleep by the door, no axes, no banners, no blood, just quiet, and someone who knows your name when they say come eat. I never had that, but I saw it once in a village we never should have touched. I remember the pot was still warm when I stepped inside, a bowl on the table, half-eaten. Someone had been sitting there just moments before. I stared at the chair. I didn't burn that house. I walked out and said nothing when the others did. That's the best I can offer you, a story of one house I left untouched. It doesn't make me good, just human and tired. I regret it all, but I wouldn't warn you, because the boy you are won't listen. Because the world you live in still rewards noise more than silence. Because I don't know how else we learn except through what we survive. And maybe, if you're lucky, what you remember, if this voice found you in the quiet dark, perhaps you were meant to hear it. Subscribe and rest easy, there are more voices waiting. They don't shout, they whisper, just like this, just like me.